to CrossTalk Scotland's vote. I'm joined by my guest in Edinburgh, Chris Bambery. He is an author, journalist and political analyst. And we also have David Coburn. He is the UK Independence Party Regional Chairman. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Chris, please explain to our international audience around the world, not just the UK, around the world, what just happened. Why did the vote fail?
The vote failed because essentially the United Kingdom establishment, the elite in Britain, threw everything they could but the kitchen sink to try and intimidate and bully Scottish voters using the fear factor into voting no. Banks threatened to pull jobs out of Scotland. Supermarkets, after a meeting with David Cameron, Prime Minister of Britain, threatened to increase food prices. Short of a plague of locusts, everything was promised. And to be honest, for the Yes campaign to get as near as they did, 1.6 million votes, narrowing the gap, the lead all the day, showed that a large section of the Scottish population were not intimidated by that. And there is a problem here for the United Kingdom elite. The no vote is an old vote. The independence vote is a young vote. This issue is going to come back again. It's not dead and buried for a generation, don't believe it. And the driving force in the independence vote was not nationalism. It was an alienation from the British state, from the British elite and from Westminster politics. And that isn't going away either. So this issue is not done and dusted in that sense. There is a widespread discontent, not just in Scotland, but across Britain with Westminster politics. And all of the parties here can't take much faith out of these elections. The SNP did not, Scottish National Party did not carry their own heartlands to a yes vote. Labour lost its traditional heartlands in the Glasgow, west of Scotland and Dundee, and I don't think it's going to get those people back. And the Tory party down south are in civil war because David Cameron had to agree to giving the Scottish Parliament extra powers in order to try and salvage a no vote, which looked like it might lose 2 weeks ago. So there's a continuing problem for all the major Westminster parties and indeed for the Scottish Government. Few people, I think, will be quite celebrating tonight because the headaches are going to begin now.
Okay, David, are you celebrating?
Well, all I can tell you is I agree with an awful lot of what my Scottish national opponent is saying. Mr. Salmon must be absolutely relieved this morning that he doesn't have to take over a state for which he has no currency, for which more than half the population do not want. And I would agree with my opponent that a lot of the reason people were voting for independence was that they were fed up with the establishment. Now, that's the establishment here as much as the establishment in London. People are sick to death of professional politicians making an absolute mess of the country, and that's what they were voting against. They were voting against the establishment in the main. But of course the vote here has been horribly gerrymandered. Cameron made an absolute mess of his dealings with Salmond. It should have been, quite frankly, all Scots. Wherever they are in the world, if you're born in Scotland, you should have a vote, a postal vote. Instead, they alienated or removed 1 million Scots, many of them soldiers, who are not currently residing in Scotland, but they're going abroad, working or whatever. So it was gerrymandered from the outside by Salmond, pulling the wool over a very foolish Cameron's eyes. So, quite frankly, it should be another 1 million votes for being in the union.
Where I agree with you, David, is... I do think this is a vote against the establishment, but I think the independence vote is particularly among young people and working class people who feel left behind because the Labour Party no longer represents them.
No,
people in Scotland who are alienated from the Labour Party. And I think that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Go ahead, keep going, Chris. Keep going, and then go to David.
I'll agree with that.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think there is a long-term problem here for Britain as well, because this issue is not done and dusted. The European referendum, which is quite likely to follow in Britain's membership of the European Union, the latest opinion poll done by Chatham House this week shows Scotland and London would vote to stay in the European Union. The rest of Scotland would vote. Rest of England would vote to come out. If England voted to come out of the European Union, Scotland stays in the European Union, then there's going to be another crisis round the corner. So this isn't going away, and there's a structural crisis here because really the issue is not so much what's happening in Scotland. The problem is right across the board. Westminster is failing, the Westminster establishment is failing, and that ain't going away either.
David, let me go to you. We heard from Chris that this wasn't about nationalism. Hang on, there's a slight time delay. Chris said it wasn't about nationalism. Is it about democracy? Is it about making the authorities accountable? Because Westminster is very, very far away from the average person's life, particularly in Scotland. Go ahead, David.
Well, I don't think it's to do with Westminster. Quite frankly, that's got nothing to do with it. It's people fed up with the establishment, both in Holyrood and in Westminster. People in Scotland, if you're living up in Shetland, or you're living in the Western Isles, or even if you're living in Glasgow, you don't want to be run by that lot over in Edinburgh. And some of the people would rather be run by London than run by Edinburgh. So quite frankly, it's an upset with the establishment. People are not happy with the current establishment. They're out of touch, all the politicians of all parties. That's why UKIP are doing so well. That's why UKIP are going to take more and more seats. We're going to take probably the seat in Manchester, which is a Labour seat. We're eating into Labour's heartlands. We nearly took Ebervale in Wales, and we will take Labour seats in Scotland. So you're going to see UKIP as a spearhead of the anti-establishment. So in many ways,
I tell you what I think is going to happen, David.
This is all about
what I think is going to happen is I think the SNP, which I do not support,
because let me just finish. They didn't make the case for the economics of nationalism. It was utter nonsense. Salmon had no idea what currency he was going to use. People were absolutely horrified by what he was going to do, and a lot of people in the no camp were actually quite complacent and didn't think it's possible to happen because they thought Salmon was talking nonsense. But unfortunately, people are so disapproving.
What we should remember, David, is that the look at this.
All right, David, let's go to Chris. Let's go to Chris. Please go ahead, Chris.
My prediction is that, and I'm not a supporter of the Scottish National Party, but they're going to win the next two elections in Scotland because effectively they've split Labour. 40% of Labour's voted yes, and they were dumped on by their leadership, abused like everyone else who voted yes, and I don't see them going back in their heartlands like that. But this issue of democracy is really at the cutting edge here because it's not just in Scotland, it's across the Western world. Yeah. We have seen democracy being hollowed out. And when you have an election which the entire establishment is chucking for everything it can at you, when the BBC is so biased in the terms of its coverage, those people who voted yes, which is 46% of the population, are going to be more and more alienated from what those structures are and from the media. And that's something that's happening across the west of Scotland. And for a young generation, and particularly working class people, there's a feeling that no one speaks for them. They found a voice in this campaign, and I think actually they're going to keep going. And that's again a problem with what's happening in the neoliberal world, that the Labour Party, for instance, which traditionally represented working people, has moved so far away from its tradition that these people feel left behind in those communities. I don't think it's going to be UKIP that's going to pick up on this. I think it's going to be the radical left, and indeed, unfortunately for me, the SNP.
Okay, Dave. No. David, go ahead. Please do respond.
Well, I totally agree with what he's saying. People are alienated from the establishment, but they will not be voting for the radical left. I can well assure you they will be voting for UKIP, because UKIP represents people right across Britain, from the very south to the very north. We're not based in the southeast like the Tory party. We're not based in the north like the Labour party.
Scotland, David.
We represent everyone. We're not interested in a class-ridden society. We want a meritocracy where everybody has a chance to get ahead, and we also want a chance for everyone to make some money. And the trouble with Scotland is it's killed by the dead hand of state socialism, and we'll be fighting in UKIP Scotland to see a capitalist Scotland, an Adam Smith Scotland, an Andrew Carnegie Scotland. We want the sort of Scotland where young people are encouraged to set up businesses to do well. At the moment in Scotland, the Scottish Nationals, the Labour Party, just say, you young man, you young lady, we don't want you making money. You must be part of the state collective, or you're a very, very bad person. Well, we want to get rid of that nonsense that's been on for the last 60 years in Scotland. We are going to replace it with capitalism, and that's what UKIP are all about. And that will be the spearhead.
Okay, Chris, what does capitalism and democracy have to do with each other these days? Go ahead, Chris.
Very little in terms of neoliberalism, in terms of the thing. There is very little democracy now. It's been hollowed out, as I said, across the Western world. A choice between Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, rather like we have in the United States of America. And this is a point because people do feel left behind. And you look at Scotland today. I want a better Scotland, but I want a Scotland where child poverty is eradicated. It is a scandal that we have 1 million families in this land blighted by poverty. And that gap is not getting narrower. It's actually going to get worse.
Let's see some capitalism. Let's get rid of the dead hand of socialism.
to see a Scotland where you have real jobs created. Real jobs, not Big Mac jobs, not precarious jobs, real jobs, where we discuss how can we rebuild our industry to provide decent employment. I want to see it in Scotland. I want to see a Scotland where welfare is put on a priority over the free market. Now, that's an agenda which caught on in this campaign.
Okay.
And I tell you what, you look around, Britain is failing because it's providing Big Mac precarious jobs. That's the sort of jobs we have in Britain at the moment. We don't want that.
Okay, David, go ahead before the break. Go ahead, David.
And that's all the only thing the state can provide. Well, basically, that's all the state can provide. The state can provide no jobs. Only businesses provide jobs. We get the dead hand of socialism off Scotland. Let young Scottish entrepreneurs get on and make money and provide jobs for their fellow citizens. That's what we want in Scotland.
David, the country is controlled by a handful of corporations and banks.
State socialism and young...
There's an oligarchy in Britain,
Well, that's
David.
because you're not giving young people a chance to get on. Let's get young people to get on.
The young people have to break through the oligarchy.
I am against it as much as you are. I want to see a change. Okay. Right, and what you must do
gentlemen,
is you must
we're going to go to a break and we'll talk about...
Considered.
I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the outcome of the independence vote in Scotland. Okay, Chris, even though the vote didn't pass, I think the people that supported the vote, the yes vote, are going to be seen as heroes all across the Western world. My goodness, direct democracy, we haven't seen that for a very, very long time. And it didn't pass, but it's going to be an inspiration for people on the continent to move forward, to actually make the change happen, because we keep hearing these establishment parties saying they're going to make the change for us. Well, that's the kind of, political socialism that is nonsense. It has driven the Western world into the ground, hollowed out ideology in the name of ideology. My hat's off to the people of Scotland for what they've been able to do. Go ahead, Chris.
Look, it's been a fantastic campaign, really invigorating. And in the smallest communities, in the smallest islands, we've had people talk about the return of the public meeting in communities. And this is a point. The Yes campaign, and actually the radical edge of it, the radical independence campaign, got into working class communities which no longer have any representation. The Labour Party dumped and are rebuilding some form of focus, giving these people a voice. And I don't think this is going to go away. And we have to structure into this that the problems that actually across Britain aren't going to go away. For instance, David Cameron postponed airstrikes in Iraq until after this referendum. In 2 weeks' time, Britain's going to be drawn back into the morass of Iraq. The people don't want that. They remember the debacle of the 2003 invasion, which they opposed and which the elite went ahead and carried through despite the wishes of the people. That's going to become an issue. We have austerity measures. They're a constant issue. So this isn't going to go away, and people are going to be looking for more forms of democracy, better than exists at Westminster, certainly, and actually slightly better, I have to say, at Holyrood, but not good enough. We want more democracy. We want the participation which we saw in this campaign to carry on.
Okay, David, I mean, who can be against democracy, and particularly a direct form of democracy that we saw in this referendum? Because I think it's really extraordinary. Go ahead.
Yes, well, I mean, I think we see throughout Europe and sort of 1848 year of revolutions. But the thing is, my opponent here is missing the one big revolution we need, which is against the European Union. The European Union is the greatest destroyer of jobs. It is the greatest bureaucracy that I can possibly name, a dictatorship of bureaucracy. It's a vile institution. It needs to be closed down. So we've got rid of the the problem in Scotland. There's a certain deficit. People wanted more representation at Holyrood. That's always something we can all discuss. But the next step is to get the whole Great Britain out of the European Union. The European Union is a disaster for Scotland. It's destroying our fishing stocks. It's destroying our financial services industry. It's destroying our democracy. And I know, because I'm there every day of the week. I have to sit there and press buttons. And for laws that nobody understands, which are not being voted for by the people of Scotland or Great Britain or anywhere else for that matter. And you'll see more and more people are wanting to rebel against that. So that's the next step.
On the European Union. It's an undemocratic organisation.
Go ahead, Chris. Keep going.
David, I actually agree with you on the question of Europe. It's an undemocratic organisation, unaccountable, enforcing neoliberal measures, and we've seen what it's done in Ukraine, which is very dangerous in my opinion. However, the conclusion I draw is rather different from yours. The people I want to make allies with are those people fighting back across southern Europe against austerity measures. I'm looking towards the fact, I would welcome the fact that Syriza, the radical left party in Greece, the biggest party in Greece, welcomed a yes vote, supported a yes vote. I want to be continuing to work with them, people in Catalonia who want to escape the terrible situation that's been created in Spain by this Eurozone crisis. Absolutely. They're my allies. And I'm pleased as well that actually Scotland is rather less immune, more immune to the sort of anti-migrant feeling which we're seeing across Europe, which is racist, to be perfectly honest, in terms of what's been taking place. But also I have to say I'm proud that, you know, 87% of the population voted in this referendum. Anywhere else in the world, in the Western world, looking at that figure, I'm thinking that's staggering. You know, compare it with the participation in any of the elections in these islands or indeed the United States. The contrast's real.
Okay, Chris, let me stay with you here. What I think was really interesting is that let me stay with Chris here, Dave. You know, we had the President of the United States weighed in on this. Yep. What business is it of the United States? Oh, I know what it is. It wants to keep NATO together so NATO can continue to expand. It doesn't need its major ally or its major poodle in NATO to be disunited.
Absolutely right.
And this is what really terrifies me. You know, this is all about NATO and EU structures that are inherently anti-democratic. Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, I think you're absolutely correct in this. Obama, the Pentagon, the rest wanted a no vote because Britain is the loyalist ally. And anything that weakens Britain's power in the world weakens their ally. So they don't want that to happen. And they knew if it was a yes vote as well, Trident missiles would have to go. They would have to leave Scotland, leaving Britain the only permanent member of the United Nations Security Council without nuclear weapons. So they were not prepared to see a diminution of British power because they're going to rely on Britain once more for another adventure in Iraq or even a possible adventure in Ukraine. Heaven help us. And it begs a question, which I have to say, is that it now seems to be the case that to be a member of the European Union, although it's not written to the Constitution, you have to be a member of NATO. And so we're seeing a coming together, particularly over Ukraine, of the European Union and NATO, taking a really aggressive policy here, and a very dangerous policy indeed. So I believe that the sort of Scotland I would like to see would not just get rid of nuclear missiles, but I would like to see it out of NATO because it is fundamentally undemocratic, and it's an aggressive military alliance. You know, the creation of this spearhead rapid response force based in Eastern Europe is clearly aimed at Russia, is clearly aggressive, and to me it's utterly crazy that the West should be going for a confrontation with Russia at the present moment in time.
Okay, David, do you think on the continent people are going to be looking this as, like Catalonia, for example, as an inspiration because they're going to continue down the path of getting their own autonomy and possibly independence as well? Scotland is setting a precedent right now, and for a lot of people in Europe that are against the European Union, that see that their country's sovereignty has been stolen from them by Brussels, is going to start repeating what Scotland has attempted to do. And as Chris pointed out, Scotland isn't finished yet.
Well, I don't think Scotland is. I think the issue of Scottish independence in the United Kingdom is utterly over now. That question will not be raised again. But yes, we must deal with the European Union. This is a major problem. It's been causing trouble in southern Europe. With Russia over the Ukraine. Quite frankly, that's adventurism on the part of a bunch of amateurs, namely Cathy Ashton, the former foreign minister, what she was, of Europe. There's over-expansion, giving all sorts of ideas to countries that they can't fulfill. But most importantly of all, the nuclear weapons angle. There I disagree with my friend. Nobody's invading North Korea for the very simple reason they've got nuclear weapons. And quite frankly, that's something we need to keep. Mr. Putin's is very adventurous at the moment. I would not think unilateral disarmament is a terribly good idea. The Soviet Union previously sponsored CND, of which Cathy Ashton, I believe, was the treasurer, which received a great deal of money from the Soviet Union. So quite frankly, I don't think nuclear disarmament is a good good idea. I think Britain should perhaps, make sure we continue this. Now, whether it's in Scotland or where else, well, that's another matter. But quite frankly, it should be in Scotland, because Scotland has always pulled its weight in every war.
Well, David, the problem is Britain has a problem with weapons of mass destruction everywhere else in the world, except in Britain.
My grandfather fought in those wars.
Okay, Chris said, you said in the beginning of the program that the establishment.
No.
Let me go to Chris. Let me go to Chris here.
Let
me go to Chris here. Yeah, we have a small time delay with David here. Chris, you said in the beginning of the program that the establishment threw everything they had at this at the No campaign, and I came across a very interesting article that if Scotland got its independence, it could be invaded by Russia. I mean, this is part of this propaganda hype that I just found unbelievable. Why in the world Russia would be interested in Scotland is beyond belief.
They said Scotland could be invaded by Russia. They claimed Al-Qaeda could use Scotland as a base to infiltrate into England. I mean, literally, they said everything would happen. The Loch Ness Monster, one newspaper headline said, was going to leave Scotland and move to England. I mean, I'm really serious about this. They said everything would happen, bar the plague of locusts, and would arise. And for people, 1.6 million, 46% of the population, to still vote yes is an incredible thing. And this is not done and dusted, because the idea this is sorted for a generation is not true. It's going to be a small generation. We've had the age profile of the no vote is old. I hate to say it, I'm not so young myself, but actually the yes vote is young, and things are going to move forward here very quickly. And the reason why people voted for independence in Scotland, again, it's not because of nationalism or race or anything like that, is they feel Britain has left them. They feel Britain no longer speaks for them. They no longer feel part of a British state which is broken down. It's the British state which is failing its people, with the levels of poverty we see, the low incomes that we see in this country, the problems of housing.
No.
Okay, David, let me go to you. We're almost out of time here. What does the establishment learn? What does the establishment learn from this vote in London and in the European Union at large? Have they learned anything about what has just happened in Scotland?
Well, I think Mr. Cameron learns nothing from any experience he's ever had. I doubt the establishment will learn anything about it. We'll just have to rely on the next election, where I believe that we will, UKIP may well hold the balance of power or more, and I believe we'll send several MPs. UKIP MPs from Scotland to Westminster, and we will have 7-8 members of the Scottish Parliament at the next Scottish elections. So what we need is to get people, energise young people, to give them a future. And if a lot of young people are disillusioned, they're not disillusioned by the British state, they are disillusioned by the political class in Great Britain and in Scotland as well.
Okay, David, let me jump in here. David, let me jump in here. Let me go to Chris
Joanne
here.
Lamont last night. She's disgraceful.
I want to give Chris the last 30 seconds here. What would you say to young people all across the Western world about direct democracy?
Keep going and use this example of what direct democracy can build. Build in this and say no to austerity, no to more illegal wars, and build a popular democracy like we've seen on the ground in Scotland. We almost got this. I hope the people of Catalonia do get it, and I believe they will, but also we need to keep moving, because there's a lot wrong in the Western world, and people here have shown that they can mobilise and challenge this neoliberal template, which means everyone just signs up to an economic and social policy which is failing our people. So keep going and learn from Scotland.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests.